Summer's arrived on the Tri-Shear, and wherever you look, all is calm. Today, tranquility truly reigns on this remote Hebridean island. However, life here has not always been so peaceful and uneventful. This land has been subjected to several terrible blows, some caused by man's greed and others by the force of the elements.
On the edge of the Machar, just above the beach, stands this granite monument, a memorial to those who perished in a tragic sea disaster right here on an autumn evening over 165 years ago. And although it is still regarded as Britain's greatest maritime disaster in peacetime, in the wider world, very little is known about it.
On the 9th of September 1853, an emigrant ship named Annie Jane set sail from Liverpool, heading for Quebec in North America. On board were 450 men, women and children, fleeing poverty and famine. They never made it. After 19 days of battling storm-force winds and heavy seas, the ship was severely damaged, and just past St Kilda, the disabled Annie Jane was blown back towards the treacherous waters of Vatersay. Alan Murray has researched and written a book on the subject.
So Alan, what do we know about the night of the disaster?
Well, the night of the disaster, the ship was sailing along here, trying to clear Barra. She was seriously disabled by then. There was only jury-rigged sails. They were drifting along a rocky shore with the wind driving them onto it. So the captain had a look, and there was only one possibility really of saving some of those passengers. They decided to sail into Vatersay Bay, and they directed the ship straight in till she hit the sand, and then she began to turn broadside. The centre of the ship collapsed completely. That took away the galley and everybody who was on deck.
Tell us a little bit about the people that were on the ship.
There was the usual Irish who were aboard. There was 100 Scottish tradesmen. I worked out the average age once, and the average age of the people aboard is 23, and the average age of the crew was 24. So it was really quite a young group that were aboard it. Then, when you were a tradesman, you were maybe starting your trade at 11, 12, 13. So these were fully qualified tradesmen who were aboard, and the vast majority of the Scottish ones, 100 Scottish tradesmen, were going over to work on the Canadian railways. There were some first-class passengers, mainly from Switzerland. Quite a fascinating demographic.
Is there any lessons that can be learned from the Annie Jane?
That it's still going on today. There's still poor people who just want to better themselves, and they're trying to make new lives. So sometimes I thought, here I am writing about 350 people here, and yet at the same time I'm watching the news, and there's people being washed up on Greek beaches, and it's still going on. Tragically, it's still going on today.
Okay, because I'm just trying to imagine after the sinking of the Annie Jane what it would have been like arriving here on Vatersay. What kind of welcome they would have got?
Well, not a very warm one anyway. Vatersay in 1853, it's completely different to the way Vatersay is just now. That was the main house. It was a farmhouse at the time. It was run by a guy from Tarrantry, Donald MacDonald. He had other smaller, dwelling houses as well, a handful of them, because it was run as a farmhouse. Well, there were so many people on the boat, and they had a different attitude to people back then. I think it would have been pretty hard, especially on the lower class. I don't think they would have got enough to keep them going, maybe, and that would be about all. The captain would have been well looked after, and all the first class passengers that they would have had. if they had money or whatever, the ones with money, they would have been well looked after, but the rest of them, they were living, there was stables and buyers down at the end of the road down here, and I think most of them were actually, that was their accommodation, basically. As long as they had cover, that was all they had, really.
A little over 100 folk survived the sinking, and they would have found a very different island than the Vatersay of today. The story of the Annie Jane is dominated by the wreck, but it's also a story about displaced people looking for a home. In the early 1900s, this same restlessness and sense of purpose was adopted by the Vatersay Raiders, descendants of the people who were ruthlessly evicted from Vatersay in 1840.
At the time of the sinking of the Annie Jane, Vatersay was just a farm, really. There was no population, they'd been cleared off some years before. So it would have been very basic. Whatever was in the big house was just to service the farm, and that was it.
How would the island have coped with over 100 shipwrecked survivors arriving, turning up on the island?
The survivors that came off that but outnumbered the people who were there some 10, 12 times. I mean, how on earth would they even begin to cope? And do you think you'd still have a job if you let all these people slaughter your master's flock and cows? So it must have been very, very difficult for them.
Florrie, the Vatersay Raiders, can you tell me about them?
Well, the Vatersay Raiders, they were people who had been who had been cleared from the likes of Vatersay and who were just living a very hand-to-mouth existence.
Is it right that Vatersay was owned by one single person?
Well, at the time of the Raiders, it was Lady Gordon Cathcart. She was the daughter of Colonel Gordon of Cluny, as far as I'm aware. So she was the landowner at the time. The land was cleared of the people. You know, they obviously had to go somewhere. Some emigrated, just like happened to the ones that were on the Annie Jane, but others were just existing in wherever they could. So they could see Vatersay, a fertile land that used to be theirs. And through the years, the people had tried to come back and ask for bits of land to grow potatoes, because they were just living in glen on the edges, just wherever they could find a space. So those people, every few years, things would get really tough for them, and they'd try and go back, and they'd get knocked back and said, no, you can't. And she'd say the ground wasn't good enough for potatoes. And they heard that if you can get a fire in your hearth before that daybreak, that the land is yours. So they were invoking this ancient law. Some of them ended up in court, they were taken away. But I think the tide kind of was turning against these big landowners having all this land while the people were starving next to them. So it was really the media that changed it all. You think media is a new thing, but it's not. And then those days it was in all the papers, and that's what started to change the tide of public opinion. You know, they changed things. They changed things not just for themselves, but all throughout the west coast of Scotland and Ireland. People were starting to, you know, here, we've got rights here too. We shouldn't just be ignored.
Well, very sadly, there's still disasters happening with people trying to escape from poverty or war or trying to better themselves.
It's kind of ironic, I suppose, that these immigrants who came from places like Ireland, Glasgow, they were having the same difficulties as the place they landed on. The people from there had been cleared off, so it could easily have been people from original Vatersay who went on a ship who ended up back there.
Each year, hundreds of people visit Vatersay. Some will stay a wee while, others prefer to explore, and maybe, like myself, they'll be magically drawn to the monument. A reminder of the ill-fated passengers fleeing across dangerous oceans with only a few possessions and a dream of a new life.
The Annie Jane isn't just a history lesson, it's also a wake-up call, because the people who lost their lives on this beach can teach us something about how we treat and mistreat others who are in the same unfortunate position today. And in that way, maybe the Annie Jane is a tale without an ending.